What is your name?
My name is Michael Yablonsky.
And do I have your permission to use this film?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Did you love to dance as a child, or did that become a recent hobby?
No, actually, when I was a child, I didn't dance at all. And surprisingly, I really didn't even dance very much when I was in college. I was mostly a student that spent a lot of my time studying. However, when I was in college was the early 80s, and there was a lot of good dance music around. Like it was just after the disco period and coming into some new kind of period, which I don't remember. But there was a lot of good music around, and so everyone danced a little bit in college, and I played a few musical instruments for a little while. But mostly I spent a lot of time studying. And I just started dancing, as I mentioned to you, but I'll tell you again that I started dancing again just 2 years ago to do a protest dance during the Black Lives Matter movement. So it is a new thing for me.
Describe the moment you found dance to be a part of your routine.
Okay, so the moment was I was dancing for 2 days during the Black Lives Matter movement. And on the second day, whenever I would stop to take a rest from dancing, a lot of students would come up to me and say that they liked the dancing a lot, and they asked me, please don't stop. So then it became part of my routine because I realized at that time that I could use it as a way to meet a lot of students and then either tutor those students or talk to them about environmental science or something like that. So it became like my way to make contact. And especially, as you may know, I don't know, in my generation we had a term called the generation gap, which is that sometimes young people didn't associate with older people very much. So I realized this could be sort of like a way to bridge the generation gap because I was doing something that young people were interested in, which was surprising to me actually.
Describe your outfits. Do they represent something to you? If so, what is that?
Okay, so like for example, maybe I can start with what I have on today, which sometimes I do dance in formal clothes, but of course I wouldn't have the jacket on because that would be too hot. So I would dance in sometimes in formal clothes, like this kind of dress shirt, vest, and tie. Oh, I'm sorry, this is on here, so I'll just move it. Okay. So okay. So but what I do, and you asked me about meaning, is, for example, I almost always wear green or brown, and as you can see, all my ties have like botanical patterns and things like that. So the meaning of this particular kind of clothes is to remind people to be like a visual reminder of the environment, because when they see green, they'll always think of sustainability in the environment. And so I just combine with the green, I combine brown because it's a common natural color, and I wear a lot of different ties. Most of the ties have botanical patterns, but some of them also have animals and things like that on them. Awesome. So if you don't mind, I'll just put this back in.
Wherever you can find.
Okay, so
even if you clip it down farther on your shirt, it'd be out of sight. So
okay, so actually I can clip it on my tie.
Yes.
So what I'll do is
put it on your shirt.
I'll put it under my vest and clip it on my tie further down. And that should,
That's perfect.
Good,
yes.
Good. Okay, so and then I have many other outfits. I don't know if you've seen them, but one of the most popular ones with the students is when I wear all white clothes, and the clothes are taken from the Army surplus store. So the reason I don't want them to look like military clothes, but military clothes look sort of more formal and neat. The men's white Navy pants have creases and things like that, and they have multiple layers, which is just like my idea of interesting fashion is to have layers. So on that day I have all white clothes, and the most famous thing about that outfit, and you have seen it, is I wear a rainbow belt on those days. It's just because when you wear all white, the bright color attracts the light color attracts people's attention, but then it looks boring because there's no color. And I thought the rainbow belt is a nice thing because it's a symbol of diversity now, which I think is a very interesting thing.
Why did you begin dancing outside in public?
So, all right, actually, it's interesting. I almost did begin dancing outside because of I did the protest dance for the Black Lives Matter movement. But then when I thought back on it, I remembered something that I forgot. And this will make perfect logical sense, if you remember the Black Lives Matter movement, the COVID virus came before the Black Lives Matter movement. And during that time when the virus came and we were all stuck at home, I was doing a little bit of dancing at home in my house, like in front of the mirror, just because I was already thinking about doing the protest dance. So technically I started dancing a little bit inside, but I enjoy dancing outside a lot more because there's fresh air and there's more space to move. If you wear sneakers or some soft shoes, a concrete surface is actually very good to dance on. So, and then of course there's the people. Once I decided to do it as a protest, I danced outside because I wanted people to see me.
Is there a reason you choose to listen to your music in headphones instead of out loud?
Yeah, so actually a lot of students have asked me this later on. After I was dancing for a while and students got to know me, a couple of the students asked me, they wanted me to play the music out loud so they would know what I was playing. But technically, and someday I probably will do that, but technically in Chapel Hill, there's a noise ordinance, although it's hard to believe because we have these very loud cars going by in Chapel Hill all the time. But I can understand why there would be a noise ordinance, because if everybody played their music very loud, it would be chaos. So for now, I obey the noise ordinance and I don't play my music out loud. But I'm thinking, and I did talk to the Chapel Hill police about this too even, and they said, yes, technically there's a noise ordinance. But someday, if I wanted some of the students to hear my music, what I would do is put music outside and play it at a volume just loud enough for people to hear when they're close to me, but wouldn't interfere with other people's business. So,
how do you pick the songs you dance to?
Okay, so that's interesting. In the beginning, I had to get some music pretty quickly, so I just went back to dance, and it's mostly beat because, as you said, the students don't hear the music, so they don't hear the lyrics. So the lyrics don't matter at all for what I'm doing now. So in the beginning, I went back to some 70s and 80s music that I knew already, that it had a good dance beat, and I just played that. But after that, when I wanted to get more diversity of music to dance to, what I used to do is on days when I don't come into town, I'm driving out into the country or something, I turn on the radio in my car and I put on usually it has to be rock and roll or pop stations, and I listen for music. I have to listen to a lot of different pieces of music before I find one that I like. But eventually I will hear one that I like, and then when I get home, I'll write down the name of it and I'll see if I can get it on my computer or on my cell phone. And usually these days you can get almost any music you want on your computer or cell phone. So that way I try it out maybe once at home, and then if it's a good dance beat, then I use it when I dance in town on the street.
What do you have to say to those who are scared to do something as bold as you have done, like dancing outside or representing something important?
Okay, so actually I do have something important to say because other students have asked me about this. Dancing outside does have some risks associated with it, of course, because you're exposing yourself to the public, which is generally moving around doing their business. So one time I was even asked, so I'll give you the good side first. The good side is that as I get older, I feel less afraid of things. But as a man, I probably feel less afraid of things that I might have to deal with out on the street if something unexpected happened. So actually a few college students did ask me because I think they were interested in doing it. And I said, sure, do it and try it, but realize that you might be taking some risk. You know, some types of people might attract too much unwanted attention, and that has even happened several times to me when, like, I don't mind when students stop to me and talk to me for a few minutes and then get my email or whatever and then go away. But several times you'll have some people who want to come up and keep on talking to you for a long period of time, and you have to think about a polite way to let them know that you need your time back and you need them to go away. So those are some things to take into consideration. Also, there was an interesting question that what I think all the students are thinking about is, one student asked me, why don't you feel self-conscious? And that's very simple. The students can't understand this, because when I was young, I would have felt self-conscious. When you get older, you reach a point where you realize that as long as you're not doing anything offensive or anything that would bother anybody, there's no reason not to have self-confidence, because truthfully, as you get older, you just don't care anymore. You don't, I mean that in a good way. You don't care what people think about you, because when you get older, you know that lots of things are acceptable and you shouldn't worry about what people think about it.
What is life like for you outside of your time on the streets of Franklin?
Okay, so I'm very glad you asked that question, because I want the students to know some things they don't see. I do two kinds of work. Right now I don't even consider the dancing my work, but the two kinds of work I do are, I tutor students in chemistry, which is now not a big thing after the virus. But the other thing I really like to do is I do a permaculture project, which is agriculture, a type of agriculture. Really, I should say I started many years ago. Even when I was young, I always liked landscaping. And as I got older, also pretty many years ago, I used to do a lot of landscaping with ornamental plants like trees, shrubs, and perennial plants. And I still do some of that now, but gradually over time, I made the transition to growing plants that are edible or useful in some ways. But I still grow a lot of ornamental plants, and I spend a lot of my time doing that because we own two properties in Chatham County. One is a small 1 acre property that our house is on, and I already filled that with a big garden a long time ago. There's no space to put anything else in there. And then more recently, we bought a property out in the country which has no house on it, which was all a forest, and I'm trying to keep it as a forest. So there I'm making a woodland garden and a permaculture project, which I told you a little bit about, and I will tell you again if you need more information.
Okay. You have been called Peter Pan by the students. Can you elaborate on what that means to you and how the name started?
Okay, so as you can see today, it's a good day to ask me the question, because I wear green a lot and brown, and of course then I kind of, Peter Pan was a cartoon when I was young too, but when the students started calling me that, I got curious and I had to look it up and see I kind of forget what Peter Pan looked like, but what Peter Pan looked like is he or she wore a green vest or robe with a brown belt around it, I think, and green shoes. So I mean, I think it's more, in the older literature, it's more the idea of an elf, I think. So anyway, when I wear clothes like this, when I wear a lot of green, it was, as it always, I think it was one particular student that got the idea to call me Peter Pan, but then, because she's a very popular student in this university and she has a lot of friends, all her friends started calling me that, and it just spread like through the grapevine, so that it got to the point where almost all of the college students call me that. Also, I should say, on some days, which I think you haven't seen yet and some students haven't seen, some days I wear a green shirt without a brown vest, and some days I even wear a green shirt that looks like a robe. So I think it was on the days when I wore that shirt that they got the idea to call me that. It's more during the fall and the spring weather, when it gets cooler, I wear a shirt that does look like a robe, and it is green.
How has your outfit choices contributed to an environmental statement?
Okay, so as I already mentioned about these kind of clothes, of course, the green is an obvious symbol of environment and plants and nature, and the tie is an obvious symbol. The brown colors are not such obvious symbols, but sometimes the real benefit is that when people see my clothes and they don't know what they mean, then they ask me. Because I found college students, and even in town I've met older people, middle-aged people, and even older people my age, who see my clothes and think, well, that's actually very unusual, because the clothes are formal in shape, but the colors are something that a businessman would probably never wear a green shirt if they were the CEO of a company or a businessman. So they wonder, why is this person wearing formal clothes of an unusual color that doesn't usually occur in formal clothes? And this is what we used to call, when it's an inanimate object, like something you put on your coffee table. We used to call this a conversation piece. But what has happened is my clothes have become a conversation piece. And I sort of did that on purpose because, again, it's a good way to meet people. Many times when I meet people, it's because they approach me and ask me a question first, which is much easier than trying to go up to people and introduce yourself to them.
Where do you spend the majority of your time and why?
Okay, so I would say that's a very good question because I want the students to know the thing I mentioned to you about the permaculture and the agriculture. The students only know I'm here when they see me, but many days I spend my time doing this agricultural work, which, by the way, is very physical work too. So you can see that in my life I get a lot of exercise because my agricultural work gives me exercise. It's a lot of heavy work, like many times I'm moving logs, moving stones, digging holes, always planting plants, always taking plants out of pots and putting them in the ground. So I do a lot of physical work when I do my landscaping work, and then I do more physical work, more physical activity when I'm dancing, and then when I'm not doing landscaping or dancing, I'm usually walking. Like I like to walk around here, the Coker Arboretum, and campus has all kind of beautiful old trees on it, so it's a nice place to study trees. So I would say I spend my time equally between my landscaping work and the work that I do in town when I come in and to either tutor people or talk to people or do dance.
What is your favorite place on campus?
It's hard to say. Well, it's hard to say because I like all of the campus so much, but if I had to choose, I would say I like the Coker Arboretum a lot. Although it's a funny thing, I find that when you go into the Coker Arboretum, you don't see many people. I don't go there to see people, I go there to see plants. But then in order to see people, I would say my second favorite place is the student bookstore, in which they have a coffee shop. I think you know it, it's called Stone and Leaf. And one of the reasons I started going to that location many years ago is that if you've ever been in there, you know that they're up on the second floor and they have these huge windows all around the room. You can see the tower and different parts of the campus from that room. So I really like that room, and there's a lot of students in there that I can meet and talk to.
What got you interested in the environment? Describe the moment you knew that it was a large passion of yours.
Okay, so this is an easy answer because when I was young, very young, like when I was a boy, or I would say around the time I was a young teenager, around 13 years old. But anyway, I always liked nature, even before I knew that was biology. But my background was kind of unusual because I always liked nature and art. So when I was young, actually, one of the things, for example, that I used to do a lot is I used to draw a lot of pictures of birds. And when I first went to college in Pennsylvania, my undergraduate, the first 2 years I was actually an art major because I knew I liked nature and art, and when I first went into college, I thought I wanted to do art. When I was in college for about 2 years, I was taking biology electives and I was doing well in them, so that gave me the confidence. I changed my major to biology because it was a more practical thing to get a job and things like that. But even now, as people can see, I still like these two things equally. So the time when I first knew that I liked nature or biology or science and the environment, and now sustainability in the environment, well, of course, when I was young, I liked science, but in those days, of course, sustainability was not a big deal. And the environmental problems were known because that would have been back in the late 70s. And you know, I think sometimes young people need to be reminded in this country, in the 60s and 70s, what we call the counterculture in this country was very aware of the environment. And then I feel like after that, some people forgot about it for a while. But when I was too young to be in the hippie generation, but when I was a young adult, there were still people around that were part of the hippie movement, and I was very much influenced by them. And also because I grew up in the country, that helps a lot to become interested in biology and nature.
What is one thing about the environment you wish everyone knew?
Wow, one thing I wish, yes, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. I wish everyone knew about how many different small kinds of disruptions human beings do to the environment. Because of course, when you're older like me, you've seen not only the recent current trends and complaints, but all the things that came before. So for example, now the big thing is global warming, and it should be, because that's probably the biggest risk. But all through my lifetime, there's been all different kind of environmental insults, like pollution by lead, and I'm sure all the students do know about this, but they don't know that there's always been a lot of different things going on at the same time, which are all caused by the disruptions caused by human civilization when we're not careful about the way we do things.
How can students find and connect with you?
Okay, so the easiest way is, well, first of all, I should say a lot of students on this campus already have my email, because I may have tutored them, or they may have talked to me and been interested in taking my email, so students can ask other students. But the very easiest way is that I spend a lot of time in the afternoon in Starbucks, because that's sort of like my library. By the way, I do go to the library on campus, and it's very good. But when I want to study and not be interrupted, I would go to the library. But when I want to study, and then I don't mind if I was interrupted by a student asking a question, I would sit in Starbucks. And so oftentimes, and that's where students mostly have found me, when I'm sitting in Starbucks.
So those are all the questions I have for you. If you
Okay.
want to talk about things that you're passionate about, things you want people to know.
Okay, so so, and when I talk about this, I will just, when I'm addressing you, I will just say Nicole sometimes, okay? So that you know that I'm, like, maybe when I start a new topic or whatever. Okay, so Nicole, you remember last time I talked to you, we talked about the two major topics. One was energy, as in, I thought about it more, energy specifically as in having to switch to renewable forms of energy. That's one thing we talked about. And then we talked about agriculture, but especially from the point of view of the permaculture that I do, which is only one other kind of sustainable agriculture. There's many kinds, and people should look into that. So I thought of two more topics that I would like to discuss, because they're major topics in the environment. One is human population, okay, which I read several good books on, and there are many good books on human population. But now I have to say, of all the topics that we discuss about the environment, human population, of course, is the most controversial, because people will have personal attitudes about human population. But we really need to look at it from a very objective, scientific or objective or logical point of view. Okay, so the way I can summarize, because human population, the way they write it in the books, and I've read several good books, some of it is too complicated for students to be able to have the time to absorb all that information. So the best way I can describe the problem is, I designed an idea in my mind that comes from chemistry. That idea is called stoichiometry. So you know, like in chemistry, you're balancing an equation, and there's two calciums on the left side, and then when you have a reaction, there has to be two calciums somewhere on the right-hand side. So this is a proportionality, right? So all the time I studied human population, the books would be giving these numbers that I feel like they're good books, but this was not the best way to present this. The books would be giving numbers like, for example, how many people there were per square mile, right, in a certain area. But I realized that most people can't visualize a square mile, so that doesn't mean anything. So what I did is I redid that calculation, and I came up with this idea from chemistry about stoichiometry. So I said, I thought I want this as a teaching tool for students. For each one person, how many acres of land do we have on the earth? Do you understand the question that I'm asking? Okay.
Yes.
So this information is easily available, because we know the human population, and long ago we knew the land surface of the earth very accurately because of satellite imaging and things like that. But the answer is that currently, and I actually started about 7 years ago, so it needs to be updated. At that time, we had 7 billion people on the earth, and that comes out to about, rounding off a little bit, 5 acres of land per person. Okay, now a very smart colleague of mine, when I was discussing this with them, said, well, we have to consider the ocean too, and that's true, so I do. And so that's an easy calculation, because the ocean is about 75% of the Earth's surface. So if we have 5 acres of land for each person, that means we have 15 acres of ocean, which sounds strange because no one sells the ocean, no one measured in terms of acres, but still people can visualize what an acre is, okay? The interesting thing to me when I was thinking about human population, of course, I'm only thinking about population with respect to the environment, so I'm linking it to this. It's sort of like a land use concept, right? So each one of us have 5 acres of land to deal with. By the way, that's not 5 acres of arable land, which means arable means where we can grow crops, because of course large parts of the area are desert or ice, and that's all included as land, but not ice sheet. Ice sheet is not included as land. So that starts, if you think that way, and students should think that way, that starts to give you a much more clear understanding of what our situation is as human beings on the earth. What resources we have available now will always become smaller in the future as the population grows. The other important point that I realized about the ocean is a lot of people had thought, well, if we have 5 acres of land, that's not very much per person. But if we have 15 acres of ocean, that's good. But I studied a lot. After that, I forced myself to study a lot of oceanography. And it turns out that even Jacques Cousteau, which is one of the most famous oceanographers, said that the ocean is basically, in some ways, is a watery desert. People think of the ocean as having a lot of life in it, but most of the life in the ocean is near the shores of land for reasons that I won't go into, but people who study ecology will understand this. The life in the ocean is near the shores where the ocean touches the land, and mainly in the shallow waters. So the ocean's deeper waters are basically not very productive in biological things, which we would use as food mainly, right? Okay, so one more thing I want to say about population, then I'll go on to another topic. The reason population is a controversial topic also is there are some serious scientists who believe that we can have some more people on the earth and still have a good quality of life, right? So it's not a question of how many people we have. It's a question of how many people can we have and still have a good quality of life for everyone, by the way, not just for people in first world countries. We need to think about people in third world countries also. But then there's other very serious scientists that study population that have a more troublesome view because they think that we're already a little bit over the optimum human population for the earth. And people find it hard to understand, how could that work? How could we have a certain number of people and say that's too many? Because we seem to be supporting them now, right? So the concept that students need to think about is what's called play out. So I'll give you a small example of play out. Play out is like, let's say that a young couple gets married and they're planning to have a child, right? They're planning to have one child. So before they have a child, they're planning how they should arrange their house, their finances, and things like that. And then suddenly they find out that they're going to have triplets. Okay, so this is play out, right? This means that, okay, now these young people come along, and in the beginning, you have to provide them with baby food and diapers. But the thing is, when they get older, when they get to be 16 and older, then they need to have a car. And when they get older than that, they need to have a home. So the analogy that I'm making is some scientists believe that because we have such a high population now, at a low level, in many countries, a low level of quality of life, that if we were to try to bring all those people up to our American quality of life, it would either not work or we would totally destroy the Earth's environment in trying to provide them with resources. Okay, so I think this is a nice place, this can segue me into the next topic, okay? Because I think that's clear enough about human population. But what I just said is that sometimes people get the idea that providing people with resources is the difficult part. But actually, when you study the environment a lot, you find out that there's like the other side of the cycle. So what is that? When you provide people with resources, eventually those resources become waste. And I think young people can see now that the old idea of we use resources, like we use the forest for lumber, we mine things. Business was always concerned about where we get things from. It was never concerned about where things go when we're finished using them. But of course now, because it doesn't matter what you think about the Earth's population, everything that we see happening is a result of all those people acting, right? So they buy something, they use it, or they consume it, but then there's some kind of waste coming from that material that used to be a resource becomes waste. So obviously the solution to this is if we if we want to have a higher human population, we need to recycle a lot of materials, because eventually we will run out of the original materials that we took from the earth. We won't have new materials anymore. We'll have to reuse materials. So as you know, as students, this is becoming a big problem in countries that consume more, like this country. Ironically, in poor countries, third world countries, because they don't consume a lot, they don't have a lot of what like we call solid waste and things like this. Now, they do have sanitation problems, right? Because that's a different thing. Sanitation is based on waste, you know, that's not the result of overconsumption of material. Things like what we do in this country is consume a lot of plastic materials, and then we thought we would recycle those. For many years now, we've been talking about recycling and not doing a good job on it. So this segment of my talk is about, I guess, materials, you know, use of materials. It's more than just recycling, because people think about recycling in terms of things they use at home, like, you know, containers for food and things like that. But don't forget, in our society also, there's big industries. So like, for example, in a city, if a building is too old, you have to tear down that building, and there's a massive amount of materials that have to be put somewhere. Some of those we put into landfills. Some of them are safe in landfills and some of them are not. And that's a big issue that has to be addressed by young people in the future, is what actually is a landfill. In my mind, a landfill is a place where you put something when you don't know what else to do with it, or you don't want to do anything else with it. And landfills, over the past several decades, because of course I've been studying all of this since I was young, you see that engineers and people like that make you promises that this will be safe and everything. And it always turns out that if you don't use something in the best way, it inevitably ends up causing a problem somewhere down the line. So whereas when I was younger, people used to tell us that landfills would be safe, now a lot of landfills are leaking materials into the groundwater and all that kind of thing. So we just have to be more aware of all this, because in the future we have to get much better at recycling and reusing materials. Okay. So do you think you want to stop here, or you want to do more? Okay. What we could do, because